The great, sprawling ranch lay under a sky so wide and blue it seemed to swallow the earth whole. This was the land of Benjamin, a man whose heart had grown as quiet and rugged as the acres he tended. His days were a steady rhythm of sunup to sundown, a solitary dance with the cattle, the horses, and the endless turning of the seasons. The ranch house, a sturdy structure of weathered wood, held more echoes than voices, its rooms filled with the memories of a family that once was, and the silence of a man who now lived alone. Benjamin was a good man, his hands calloused from honest work, but there was a shadow in his eyes, a weight he carried deep within. It was the burden of a choice made years ago, a decision born from a young man's fear that had cost him something precious, a regret he kept locked away like an old trunk in the attic, never opened but always present. This quiet world was shattered one morning by the arrival of a frantic wagon. Benjamin's sister, her face pale with worry, explained in a rush that her husband had fallen gravely ill in a town 2 days' journey away and she must go to him at once. Before Benjamin could fully grasp the situation, she had entrusted him with her 4 greatest treasures, her children. There was a babe in arms, a toddler who clung to his knees, and 2 young ones who stared up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. And then, as quickly as she had come, his sister was gone, leaving Benjamin standing on his porch, utterly alone and completely overwhelmed by the 4 small souls now in his care. The first day was a storm of confusion. Benjamin's world, once ordered by the simple logic of ranch work, descended into chaos. The baby cried with a piercing sound that frayed his nerves. The toddler, exploring, somehow managed to open a cupboard and scatter a bag of flour across the kitchen floor, creating a cloud of white dust that settled over everything. The 2 older children were hungry and asked for food he did not know how to prepare. He tried to warm milk, but it scorched in the pan. He attempted to change a diaper, but it ended in a comical and disastrous mess. The cattle lowed in the fields, needing to be fed, but he could not leave the children. For the first time in his life, the strong, capable cowboy felt completely helpless. He sat on the floor amidst the flour and the crying, his head in his hands, wondering how he would ever manage. As the second day wore on, the situation grew more dire. The supplies of bread and milk were nearly gone. The children were restless and sad, missing their mother. Benjamin knew he had to go into town, but the thought of loading 4 upset children into the wagon for the long trip felt impossible. He stood at the window watching the dusty lane that led to the main road, feeling a desperation he had never known. It was then that he saw a faint cloud of dust in the distance, growing steadily closer. A sense of dread mixed with a flicker of hope stirred in his chest. Whoever it was, they would see him like this, a failure in his own home. The wagon that pulled into the yard was simple and neat, drawn by a single calm horse. And the person driving it was a ghost from his past, a sight that made his heart lurch painfully in his chest. It was Josephine. 5 years had passed since he had last seen her, but he would have known her anywhere. She looked different, yet the same. The youthful softness in her face had been replaced by a gentle strength, and her eyes, which once looked at him with such affection, now held a quiet, unreadable peace. She stepped down from the wagon, her simple dress brushing against the dust of the yard, and in her hands she carried a basket. The most wonderful, comforting smell of freshly baked bread drifted from it. Josephine took in the scene at once. The 2 quiet children, the harried look on Benjamin's face, the general air of disorder. She did not speak a word of greeting or of the past. She simply walked toward the house, her steps firm and sure. She walked past the stunned Benjamin, who could not find any words, and entered the kitchen. She set the warm, golden loaf of bread on the table, and the simple act felt like a promise. She then turned to the children, her voice a soft, calming melody as she spoke to them. She knelt down, wiping a tear from the toddler's cheek, and smiled at the older ones. Almost as if by magic, the tension in the room began to ease. Benjamin watched, his throat tight with a mixture of shame and awe. He saw how she gently took the baby from his arms and knew exactly how to soothe its cries. He saw how she found the remaining food and began to efficiently slice the bread and prepare a simple meal for the children. The chaos receded, replaced by a sense of order and calm that he had been unable to create. He finally found his voice, a rough, embarrassed whisper. "Josephine, I don't know what to say. About before." He stumbled over the apology, the words feeling inadequate and clumsy. Josephine paused in her work, her back to him for a moment before she turned. Her gaze was not angry or bitter. It was filled with a profound and gentle understanding that somehow made him feel even more remorseful for his past foolishness. "The past is with God now, Benjamin," she said, her voice steady. "These little ones need our help today. That is what matters." She did not stay as the sun began to dip below the horizon. She gathered her basket and prepared to leave, showing her strong principles by not remaining in a house alone with a man she was not married to. But before she climbed into her wagon, she looked at him and made a promise. "I will come back tomorrow to help you." And as she drove away, Benjamin was left not with the crushing loneliness of before, but with a bewildering and unfamiliar feeling, a fragile, blooming thing called hope. The dawn broke over the ranch with a soft, pink light, painting the quiet land in hues of promise. Benjamin was already awake, having spent a restless night caught between the lingering shame of his past and the fragile hope Josephine's visit had sparked. The memory of her calm presence was a stark contrast to the echoing silence of the house, a silence that now felt different, less permanent. He moved through his morning chores with a new sense of purpose, his ears straining for the sound of an approaching wagon. The children, sensing the shift in the air, were less fretful, as if they too were waiting for the return of the quiet woman with the gentle hands. When the familiar sound of wheels on gravel finally reached him, his heart gave a peculiar thump, a feeling he had not experienced in many years. Josephine arrived just as the sun cleared the horizon, her posture straight and her basket once again filled with the simple good things she had baked. She did not wait for a greeting or an invitation, but stepped down and immediately set to work, her movements efficient and filled with a quiet grace that seemed to settle the very dust in the air. The days that followed settled into a new and precious rhythm, a dance of shared purpose and unspoken understanding. Josephine would arrive with the sun, her presence a balm to the household's troubles. She showed Benjamin how to properly mix formula for the baby, her patient instructions a world away from his frantic attempts. She taught him the simple song she sang to soothe the toddler to sleep, and Benjamin, his voice rough and unused to melody, would find himself humming it later while mending a fence. Together they organized the chaotic kitchen, found a routine for the children's meals and naps, and slowly, the ranch house began to feel not like a place of struggle, but like a home. Benjamin watched as Josephine kneaded dough at his kitchen table, her hands strong and capable, and he saw not just the woman he remembered, but a person of profound strength and character he was only now beginning to truly know. The children flourished under her care, their laughter ringing through the halls, a sound more beautiful to Benjamin than any birdsong. In the quiet lulls of the afternoon, when the children were napping and the world was still, they began to talk. These were not the conversations of their youth, filled with easy dreams and light promises. These were the careful, honest words of two people who had been shaped by life's hardships. Sitting on the porch steps, watching the cattle graze, Josephine spoke of the years after he had ended their courtship. She did not speak with bitterness, but with a quiet conviction that held Benjamin spellbound. She told him how her heart had been broken, how the future she had imagined had crumbled to dust. But then she spoke of her faith, a faith that had been a flickering candle in a dark room. She explained how she had turned to prayer, not for the return of what was lost, but for the strength to forgive and the courage to move forward. She described the slow, steady healing that had taken place, a mending of her spirit that had left her stronger and more certain of what truly mattered in life. Her words were not an accusation but a testimony, and they pierced Benjamin's heart more deeply than any anger could have. Hearing her story, Benjamin found the courage to open the locked doors of his own soul. One evening, as the fireflies began to dot the twilight, he confessed the truth he had carried for so long. He told her that his rejection had not been born from a lack of feeling, but from a surplus of fear. He had been a young man terrified of the responsibility of a family, scared he would fail as a husband, intimidated by the sheer size of the love he felt for her. He had thought that by pushing her away he was choosing freedom, but instead he had chosen a prison of his own making, a life of solitude and regret. He spoke of the hollow years, of working the land from sunup to sundown only to come back to a silent house that offered no comfort. He looked at her, his eyes raw with honesty, and admitted that letting her go was the greatest foolishness of his life. Josephine listened, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze steady and compassionate. She did not interrupt, offering him the sacred space of her attention. Inspired by her unwavering faith and seeking his own path toward redemption, Benjamin began to explore the faith that had given her such strength. He found his mother's old Bible, its leather cover soft with age, tucked away on a high shelf. In the quiet hours of the night, after Josephine had gone home and the children were asleep, he would light a lamp and slowly, carefully read its pages. The words, once familiar from his childhood, now held new meaning. He read about love that was patient and kind, a love that was not self-seeking, a love that always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. He realized that this was the love Josephine had shown him, a love that had forgiven a deep hurt and had returned to help him in his time of greatest need without asking for anything in return. This was not the fleeting passion of his youth, but a profound, steadfast commitment. It was a love built on a foundation stronger than mere feeling. It was built on a promise, on faith, on a choice to honor another person completely. The realization settled over him with the calm certainty of sunrise. He knew what he had to do. He knew the man he wanted to become. The opportunity came on a perfect, golden afternoon. The children were playing a quiet game in the shade of a large oak tree, their laughter floating on the warm breeze. Josephine was sitting on a blanket, mending a tiny tear in the toddler's overalls, her head bent in concentration. Benjamin's heart hammered against his ribs as he walked toward her, his mother's Bible clutched tightly in one hand. He knelt on the grass before her, not in a grand gesture, but in a posture of humility and reverence. He looked into her eyes, those kind, understanding eyes that held his entire future. "Josephine," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed me what real love is. You showed me forgiveness when I deserved none, and you showed me faith when I had lost my own." He took a deep breath. "I was a fool to ever let you go. I love you with all that I am and all I hope to be. I promise to spend the rest of my life honoring you, cherishing you, and building a life with you centered on the faith you helped me find. Will you do me the greatest honor? Will you be my wife?" For a moment the world stood still. Then a beautiful radiant smile broke across Josephine's face, and tears of pure joy welled in her eyes. She placed her hand in his, her touch a seal on their new beginning. "Yes, Benjamin," she whispered, her voice filled with a happiness that echoed his own. "Yes, I will marry you." The news of the upcoming wedding spread through the small community like a warm, gentle breeze, bringing smiles to the faces of all who heard it. The story of the lonely cowboy and the kind-hearted baker, reunited by 4 children and a divinely orchestrated second chance, became a local legend, a living testament to the power of faith and forgiveness. The little country church, a whitewashed building with a simple steeple that pointed towards the heavens, became the center of their joyful preparations. On the morning of the ceremony, sunlight streamed through the plain glass windows, illuminating the bunches of wildflowers that adorned the pews. The air was thick with the sweet scent of blossoms and the soft, reverent murmur of the gathered friends and family. Benjamin stood at the front, looking taller and more at peace than anyone could remember, his best suit brushed clean and his eyes fixed on the back of the church. When the music began, everyone turned. There, holding the hands of the 2 older children who were scattering flower petals with solemn delight, was Josephine. She wore a simple, elegant dress, not of fine silk, but of a humble fabric that seemed to glow with its own light, a reflection of the pure and steadfast love that had brought her here. As she walked towards him, Benjamin's heart felt so full he thought it might burst, for he was not just gaining a wife, but was being given back his entire world, redeemed and made new. The ceremony itself was simple and profound, its words echoing the very journey that had brought them to this sacred moment. They spoke their vows not just to each other but before God and their community, promising to love and to cherish for better or for worse in sickness and in health, till death would they part. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, a collective sigh of happiness seemed to sweep through the congregation. As they turned to face their friends as a married couple, the 4 children, now clean and bright-eyed, rushed to their sides, instinctively understanding that they were now a complete and whole family. The celebration that followed was held right there on the church lawn, filled with shared food, joyful laughter, and a profound sense of blessing. It was not a party to mark the end of something, but a festival to celebrate a beautiful beginning, a foundation built upon a rock of shared faith and a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever before. Life on the ranch blossomed in the weeks and months that followed. Benjamin and Josephine moved into the ranch house together, their union now sanctified by marriage, and the very walls seemed to sigh with contentment. They worked side by side, their partnership extending from the management of the land to the nurturing of their home. Benjamin's strength was now guided by Josephine's gentle wisdom, and her kindness was supported by his steadfast protection. The house was no longer a place of silence but was filled with the sounds of prayer before meals, the reading of scripture in the evenings, and the happy, innocent noise of the children who were thriving in this new atmosphere of secure and devoted love. They legally adopted the 4 children, making official what their hearts had already declared. They were a family bound not just by blood, but by choice and by a love that chooses to stay every single day. Nearly a year after their wedding, on a spring morning when the world was bursting with new life, Josephine shared the most wonderful news. She and Benjamin were expecting a child of their own. This announcement was met with tears of joyful gratitude, for this new life was seen not as a separate blessing, but as a continuation of the miraculous story God was writing for them. They prayed together every day for the health of Josephine and the baby, their faith providing a deep and abiding peace throughout the months of waiting. The children were delighted, their young minds fascinated by the gentle changes in their new mother and the promise of a new baby to love. The entire ranch seemed to hold its breath in happy anticipation, every new calf and every blooming flower feeling like part of the celebration. The day the baby decided to arrive was a day Benjamin would remember forever. After hours of prayer and patient waiting, the sound of a newborn's cry, strong and healthy, filled the ranch house. The local midwife placed a swaddled bundle into Benjamin's trembling arms. He looked down at the face of his son, a perfect little person with Josephine's nose and a dusting of fine dark hair. In that moment, as he gazed at this miracle, every regret from his past, every lonely night, every moment of despair, melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of God's boundless grace. He looked from his son to his wife, her face tired but radiant with a love that outshone the sun, and he knew with absolute certainty that the lonely cowboy he once was had vanished forever. He was now a husband, a father many times over, a man richly blessed beyond anything he had ever dared to dream. That evening, as the sky turned to a deep velvety blue, the whole family sat together on the wide porch. Benjamin held his sleeping son, Josephine rested her head on his shoulder, and the 4 other children sat on the steps, listening to the crickets begin their nightly song. They were a portrait of a forever after, a family built not on perfect circumstances, but on a perfect love, the kind that is patient, kind, and endures all things. A love that faith had restored. If this story of second chances and the power of faith touched your heart, there are many more tales of hope and redemption waiting for you. To ensure you never miss a story that could inspire your own journey, we warmly invite you to join our community. Please subscribe to the channel for more beautiful narratives that shine a light in the darkness and remind us of the love that surrounds us all. Your support helps us continue to share these important messages. Subscribe today.